In June of 323 BC, the most powerful man in the ancient world lay dying in Babylon. Alexander had defeated armies, destroyed an empire, and marched farther than any Macedonian king before him. He was only 32, and he was not finished. His empire stretched from Greece and Egypt across Persia to the edge of India, but Alexander had named no capable adult successor. When his generals reportedly asked who should inherit everything, tradition claims he answered, "To the strongest." How had a king from a relatively small kingdom conquered most of the world known to him in less than 13 years? And how much farther could he have gone if death had not stopped him? To understand that, we must return to Macedonia. Alexander was born in 356 BC, the son of King Philip II, Queen Olympias. Philip transformed Macedonia into the strongest military power in Greece. Olympias taught her son that greatness was his destiny. Alexander grew up surrounded by ambition, rivalry, and war. According to ancient tradition, a wild horse named Bucephalus terrified every rider who approached him. Alexander noticed that the animal feared its own shadow. He turned the horse toward the sun, mounted it, and proved that intelligence could master what force could not. Philip hired Aristotle to educate his son. Alexander studied medicine, philosophy, geography, and the stories of Homer. He admired Achilles above all other heroes. But Alexander did not merely want to read about legends. He wanted to become one. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated during a royal celebration. At 20 years old, Alexander inherited the throne. Enemies immediately tested him. He crushed rebellion in the north, destroyed rebellious Thebes, and forced Greece to accept his authority. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with approximately 40,000 men. Ahead stood the Persian Empire, the greatest power on earth. Alexander visited Troy, honored Achilles, and stepped into Asia as though entering his own legend. At the Granicus River, Persian cavalry waited along the opposite bank. Alexander attacked through the water. The fighting became so close that a Persian commander nearly killed him. A companion struck the attacker down, saving the campaign before it had truly begun. The Persian king, Darius III, now gathered an enormous army. At Issus, he trapped Alexander near the coast. But the narrow battlefield limited Persia's numbers. Alexander drove directly toward Darius. The Persian king turned his chariot and escaped. Darius fled so quickly that his mother, wife, and children were left behind. They expected humiliation or death. Instead, Alexander protected them and treated them as royalty. It was mercy, but also strategy. He was already presenting himself as Persia's future king. The fortified city of Tyre refused to surrender. It stood offshore behind powerful walls. Alexander ordered his army to build a causeway through the sea. For 7 months, defenders resisted. Then the walls were breached, and Alexander made an example of the city. Egypt surrendered with little resistance. Alexander was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule, crowned as pharaoh, and honored by Egyptian priests. Near the Mediterranean coast, he founded a new city bearing his name, Alexandria. Alexander then crossed the desert to the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa. What happened inside the sanctuary remains uncertain, but Alexander left believing or allowing others to believe that he possessed divine ancestry. Victory was beginning to change how he saw himself. At Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius assembled another vast army on open ground. Alexander advanced diagonally, pulled the Persian line apart, then charged through the opening toward Darius. Again, the king fled. This time, the Persian Empire was lost. Alexander entered Babylon and seized the treasures of Persia. At Persepolis, his soldiers looted the ceremonial capital, then its palaces burned. Whether planned revenge or a decision made during celebration, the fire announced that the old Persian order had ended. Alexander pursued Darius eastward, but Persian officers arrested their own king and left him mortally wounded as Alexander approached. Alexander covered his former enemy with a cloak, then declared himself the legitimate successor to Persia. The invasion had become inheritance. Persia had fallen, but resistance continued in Bactria and Sogdiana. Alexander fought mountain strongholds, ambushes, and mobile horsemen. The campaign became brutal. To secure the region, he married Roxana, the daughter of a local nobleman. Alexander began wearing elements of Persian royal clothing. He recruited Persian soldiers and expected Macedonians to accept Asian court rituals. Many veterans believed their king was abandoning them. The man who had conquered Persia was becoming Persian in their eyes. During a drunken argument, Clytus, the officer who had once saved Alexander at Granicus, accused him of forgetting Philip and his Macedonian roots. Alexander seized a spear and killed his friend. The conqueror who mastered armies could no longer master himself. In India, King Porus confronted Alexander beside the Hydaspes River. War elephants, shattered formations, and terrified horses. Alexander crossed the river during a storm, attacked from an unexpected direction, and won one of his hardest victories. Even his enemies earned his respect. Alexander wanted to continue east. Beyond the Hyphasis River waited more kingdoms, larger armies, and more elephants. But his exhausted soldiers had marched and fought for 8 years. For the first time, they refused him. Alexander waited, then ordered the journey home. Alexander led part of his army through the Gedrosian desert. Heat, thirst, and exhaustion killed soldiers and camp followers. When scouts found a little water, they offered it to Alexander. He poured it onto the sand, refusing to drink while his army suffered. Back in Babylon, Alexander prepared new ships and armies. Arabia may have been next, perhaps the Western Mediterranean after that. But fever ended the campaign before it began. Within years, his generals divided the empire. Alexander conquered kingdoms, but never conquered time. Alexander never ruled the entire world. Rome had not been touched. India continued far beyond his final battlefield. China lay outside his knowledge. Yet in 13 years, he redrew the ancient world, spread Greek culture across continents, and became the measure by which later conquerors judged themselves. Was Alexander a visionary uniting civilizations, or a conqueror whose ambition consumed everything before him? Perhaps he was both. The greatest mystery is not how much he conquered, but what might have happened if the man who never stopped advancing had lived.